Welcome, everybody. My name is Peter Loge. I'm the director of the Project on Ethics and Political Communication. Thank you for joining us for this important conversation about the ethics of talking about political violence. I have some logistics, some throat clearing, some intros, and we'll get right to it. First piece of logistics, I am recording this conversation. We're going to encourage a conversation, encourage dialogue. We're going to answer your questions. We're not going to use anybody's name, though, in answering the questions, just to make sure that people feel free to ask what's really on their mind. Assuming nothing goes too sideways, technologically or otherwise, I'm going to email a link to the recording to everyone who registered later today, maybe tomorrow, and also post it online. So be able to review it, share it with your friends, do whatever you need to do. I think those are the logistics. Throat clearing. The Project on Ethics in Political Communication promotes the study, teaching, and practice of political communication ethics. We do this a couple of ways. One is I give talks around the US, sometimes around the world, on Zoom, in person. I'm going to come talk to your group or your school, drop me a note, right to the popular press, academic press. We've done case studies, classroom-ready case studies with the University of Texas, Austin's Media Ethics Center. I have a textbook. And occasionally we'll do things like a video conversation like this one with people who work in communications, politics, the press, or things like that. Which leads me to today's conversation about the ethics of talking about political violence. And I'm really excited to be joined by a longtime friend, sometime collaborator, sometime colleague, one of the world's leading, most sought after communications experts, founder of Spitfire Strategies more than 20 years ago, Kristen Grimm. Kristen is zooming in from a much prettier part of the country, but a little bit colder one that I'm sitting in right now. Kristen's long list of accolades includes, again, being a sought-after speaker, leading some of the most important social change and communications efforts around the country. She's been a fellow at the Aspen Institute, a fellow in the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University, a number of other things. For the past few years, she's also focused a lot on building trust and social trust. A year or so ago, Spitfire Strategies and the School of Media and Public Affairs at GW, which is where I live, co-hosted a small off-the-record conversation with some journalists, academics, and others about how to respond to political violence. We expected there might be election violence. What do we do about that? Luckily, nothing went too badly around the election. Obviously, Charlie Kirk was assassinated last week, and Kristen and I started trading emails and thought this is the time to bring back the conversation. And so here we are. Before I get to it, I also want to acknowledge this is a really complicated conversation at a really complicated time. Nobody's really sure what to do or how to do it or what they can say or they should say. And that includes us. I put a lot more work into these talking points than I have for many others. But it's also important to have, right? It's important for people who have a platform, leaders in academia, in communications, in journalism, and politics, to stand up and say, look, we got to have this conversation. So we're going to have it in that spirit today. Hopefully we'll get more of it right than not, but we're all kind of figuring this out as we go. So welcome, Kristen. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having me. I'm actually sorry we're having this conversation because I wish that we were having less political violence. But I think we want to be having this conversation because it is actually leaders who are going to have to do the hard work of setting the temperature in the country. And I think that that's just critical to get out there is we can actually eliminate political violence, but it will happen by leaders doing the right thing. So as you mentioned, and because you helped us with it, we had created a project called Best Case Scenario, because of course we don't want to have the worst case scenario. We want to have the best case scenario, whether it's around elections, whether it's around people having freedom of speech and being able to actually say what's on their mind and on their hearts, because that's so important to the democracy. So the important thing to know is that the research is really clear what needs to happen around political violence to minimize it. And the vast majority of people in the US do not want political violence. They do not think it's okay. They want to be doing everything we can to not have it. You wouldn't know that from the media coverage right now, and I know you'll probably talk about that a little bit. But there are really clear 3 steps that have to happen. The first one is you have to condemn violence in all of its form as soon as it happens. And of course, we had Charlie Kirk murdered this past week, we also had a special election because we had a representative in Minnesota who was gunned down at her home with her husband. In 2025 alone, we had Governor Shapiro's governor's residence was set on fire. These are very concerning incidences. They're tragic. We want everybody to come out. So we need to condemn violence in all of its form, and everybody has to stand against the monstrous acts. Step two is we have to reinforce, and this is critical, we have to reinforce that we can solve our differences without resorting to violence. And again, we have to be careful that this doesn't slip into the thoughts and prayers kind of vague platitudes. We have to be offering specific ways to do this. So what are we disagreeing over? And how could we actually engage in real conversations about issues that we think very differently about? And then step three, and this is just the critically important and the one we're really not seeing very much right now in the wake of these other very bad things that have happened this year in 2025 on political violence, is we have to actually model as leaders what this discourse looks like. So it's not enough to call for it. You actually have to show that you're doing it. And so I'm sort of interested, like, where are the people who are actually really sitting down? So in general, if we have 1, 2, and 3 happening, even when monstrous acts have happened, in fact, our leaders are doing the right thing. But right now, we're actually seeing a very different thing happen. Number one, we haven't really even completed step one. Rather than everybody coming together and condemning this monstrous act, we're actually seeing leaders come out and really say, basically, we need retribution. And they're encouraging retribution. And they're certainly not saying when retribution is happening, hey, that's not the right path forward. So again, we're not even in step one, really having everybody come together to say monstrous act. And second, rather than leaders starting to model, this is what this looks like, let us show you what it looks like to be in discourse with people you disagree with and not resort to violence. Instead, we're kind of actually pointing out to the leaders who are doing the bad things, who are encouraging or we feel like are inciting violence. And that's not helpful because all you're doing is amplifying the people doing the behaviors that we don't want. And these are having real, because people look to their leaders to say, how do we behave? And if they're calling for retribution, then maybe I'm going to be part of retribution. And we really don't want that. And the media, meanwhile, is hyping it. Like, you wouldn't know from the media coverage right now that a vast majority of Americans don't want political violence. They don't think it's okay. Instead, what we're really seeing time and time again are really the outliers in some ways, or they're amplifying the people who are calling for retribution, which will feed into that being the normalized behavior. And that's what I would say is on the last front is, this is a very important time for narrative setting about, well, who are we as a country? What do we do to respond to political violence? And if, you first have to say, well, what happened? And if we get that analysis wrong, if what happened is not, there is a lone guy and we need to think about, his mental health, his other things. But we also have to, we haven't even heard from this guy yet. And we have all these things out there about, what really happened. And if we have the wrong things and we say that, it was this, anonymous radical left that who even knows what that is, and suddenly we have to clamp down on free speech of civil society organizations. I think that's probably the wrong analysis. But if that is the sticky analysis, then guess what we're going to solve for? As opposed to, is that actually going to solve political violence happening again? I don't think so. So if we get the wrong problem to solve, then we're putting the wrong efforts in. And then in fact, we're creating the conditions for more political violence. So I know it's really hard, and you started with this, and I'll leave it over to you. But, I know it's really hard for people to stand up and say, you can't do this ever, 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 ever. And also, and it may be even having to say it for people that you didn't particularly respect or you didn't agree with. And you may feel like you saying you can't do this is somehow saying you agree with them, which it's not. So be clear what conversation you're in. But it's also really important to say, this is what we need to do so that this doesn't happen again. And make sure you're standing up in integrity for the things you actually care about. And if that's free speech, then, it's free speech. So I complicate it, but that's what I would say. Those are the steps we have to take, and we're not doing a very good job on most of them.
So a lot to unpack there. I want to try to put this in a couple of buckets, working deductively, because that's, as you know, what I do. The first is a really important thing you said, which is what political leaders say matters. People listen to political elites, to media elites, to their friends on social media. They model that behavior. So what politicians say matters. So politicians, pundits, the press, everybody needs to say the right thing, and that thing needs to be consistently, political violence is wrong,
Exactly.
it is rare, and it is unpopular. Um, as you said many times, communication is meaning making, right? And in any moment of crisis, people say, oh, what does this mean? What is this about? And one of the instincts is to say, oh, this proves I was right all along because this other thing I believed. And the thing we all have to have believed is that political violence is wrong. Democracy is structured conflict through debate. The point is we debate rather than fight. Violence is a failure of democracy. More democracy, less violence. Not less conflict, less violent conflict.
Right.
Another thing you said, which is also super important, is that political violence is incredibly unpopular,
Right.
right? There are
That's
always
right.
surges of support or whatever. Political leaders come out against political violence, support declines. There's a political scientist named John Sides at University of North Carolina who writes for an outlet called Good Authority, and he's pointed out that political violence remains unpopular. If you ask people, the same person, like 3 weeks in a row, do they support political violence? Even if they support it at point one, they won't at point three. The people who consistently support political violence are people who aren't paying attention. A lot of pollsters will put something in polls to make sure you're paying attention to the survey. And the people who consistently support political violence are the ones who consistently don't pay attention to the survey, right? So it's just not a popular thing. And it is also rare. I mean, you point out that obviously we've seen some headline grabbing attacks, which have been, are you kidding me, awful against Mr. Kirk, the assassination attempts against President Trump, Governor Shapiro. But it's also important to recognize that it's rare. There are more than 500,000 elected officials in the US, city councils, mayors, state legislators, and all the rest. Most of those elections are fine. They're people talking to their neighbors, right? So we have to cover political violence, but we also need to make sure to put it in context. And I want to give you an example of people putting in context well and poorly. I'm going to name the good headline, but I won't name the outlet for the bad headline. There's a reporter it's the National Desk. I'm staring down, look at my phone. Here we go. The National Desk, which is Sinclair's digital operation. So Sinclair owns a bunch of TV stations. You also have digital. There's a journalist there named Corey Smith, smart, thoughtful guy who writes thoughtful pieces. His headline from a few days ago was, some call for calm as noisy and angry social media reacts to Charlie Kirk's killing. He leads with call for calm. Another international outlet I will not name, headline was, Dems more likely to think celebrating public figures' death is acceptable, poll.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, more, but still shockingly few. Right?
Very
Misleading. If you read the article, it puts it in context, but if you don't read the article, it doesn't. I want to do one example of a couple people modeling good behavior. I think one is Governor Cox of Utah immediately came out. This is wrong. He leads an effort with the National Governors Association called Disagree Better. He spoke here at GW a year or so ago. Not everybody liked everything he had to say or how he had to say it, but he quickly came out against violence, which is important, as did Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania. Just condemned violence, full stop. One of my favorite examples of how to deal with this well actually is old. 1972, African-American member of the House of Representatives named Shirley Chisholm ran for president as a Democrat in the Democratic primary. And Black women, first on a major party, to run for a major party ticket. Her slogan, which I loved, was unbossed and unbought, which I feel like is a great political slogan in general. In the same campaign, George Wallace was running. Wallace, Southern segregationist, famous for standing in the doorway of a school saying segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. Wallace was the victim of an assassination attempt, 5 bullets, wound up in the hospital. A lot of people went and visited him, including Shirley Chisholm, African-American woman running as a Democrat, went and visited a Southern racist segregationist who'd been the victim of violence to prove that politics matters more and violence is wrong. A lot of then Representative Chisholm's staff opposed this move, including a current member of the House of Representatives from California who's a junior staffer, right? Like, we can do this and we have to do this. And I know we're going to get to questions, but I do want to throw one last thing out, which I know a lot of people are asking, and I hear a lot is, well, what do we blame? What do we do? Who do we blame? And we can talk about that a lot, but I think what's important is in this moment, that we condemn violence and point out that it's rare and unpopular. And a metaphor I've used is that if the house is on fire, you put out the fire. You argue about who left the stove on later, right? And how to make sure the stove isn't let on and who should check on the person. Like, let's argue about that later. Right now, let's make sure the house doesn't burn down. So I think
Right.
we need to, the responsible thing to do is focus on that. Make sense, more or less?
I think that makes sense. I think that makes
So I know
sense.
we
And
had a,
the only thing I would want to say about I do want to say this, the blaming thing is also not that useful. Going to your stove analogy, and I know you and I talked about that the other day, is I think sometimes, especially when we are not blaming the right things. So if it's like the dog left the stove on, it's especially not helpful. But I think sometimes when people are trying to assign blame and get defensive, we're actually not solving the problem. So the question is how did we get here? And let's find the real reason, and then let's focus on that. So to your point, though, right now, what we really need is everybody saying this is totally unacceptable. Because if the people you look to say, here's how I behave in society, are telling me this is completely unacceptable, we'll have fewer people thinking about doing it.
right. Because if most people learn about politics watching the news or social media feeds or whatever, most of them don't live the lives you and I do, where we think about this all the time, because they would much rather do almost anything else.
That's right.
And so if everything they see is politics is full of angry, violent people, they will think in order to be in politics, I have to be angry and violent. And nobody wants that job,
Right.
which means they'll check out. Our politics will be less representative, it'll be less meaningful, it'll be less useful, it'll be less in general, leaving politics only to the people who like to be violent and angry,
That's right.
right? If the media tell us that politics is awful and it's full of violent people and you're going to get death threats and everybody's going to hate you, why on earth would anybody run for mayor? What we
Right.
need to do is point out that politics is about us, right?
Right.
Politics is you and me coming together to figure out whose turn is it to shovel the driveway and how are we going to chip in to pay for the school. That's what politics is,
All
you
right. You're
know, and
starting to do the
occasionally,
academic thing. Let's go to questions. You're going too long. You're going too long. We got to go to questions.
yeah. So I know we've had a lot of people weigh in early, and I know
People
people
should
are.
feel free to add questions to the chat.
So I know one thing that people did ask early on that you're the comms expert here. I'm the guy who used to be the comms guy, is what specifically does it look like? Like I'm on social media or I'm talking to my friends. What specifically does it look like to model good behavior?
It literally is backing up your word. So if you say, "Hey, listen, we can work out our differences without violence," is to actually say, "This is what I did." So I think you know that I live in a very red state. I myself am more of the progressive persuasion, and I hold porch concerts at my home, and I invite people over to talk about the issues that we really care about in my community, like public lands. And so by bringing in people and offering ice cream and music, we're able to talk about things in a way that, we're going to disagree, of course. But when we're doing it in front of people's kids. We actually are listening to each other and we're building greater understanding. But again, it's not just, oh, you should totally go talk to people who think about this differently than you. Like, actually go do it. That's really what you have to do. And if instead it's like, what I'm going to go do is like, retribution to the people that I think are responsible for this, then that's actually you're showing the exact opposite behavior. So, and people are watching for that. This, like, what are we supposed to do in the wake of this? And people are looking for it. So, what we really need is a lot of leaders. And again, it's not easy right now. We have a lot of issues that are hot button issues, but we need to be seeing them, actually going and reaching out and talking to them. To your point of probably wasn't very easy for Sally Chisholm to go do that. I bet a bunch of her own people were like, "Are you kidding me? You're going to go to that person's hospital bedside?" But it's like, yeah, this is bigger than us. This is how we operate in America. So let's and that means that's how we operate in America. So it can't be when it's convenient for us, or like it's going to be really hard right now to do some of this
And
stuff.
I think it also means it's not a false politeness, right? It's not, hey, I didn't really mean it. We're all going to get along because you like ice cream. I like ice cream. It's like disagreeing is normal. That's healthy. That's good. That's how we get better answers. And sometimes those disagreements are important and they can be sharp, and that's okay, right? We can be friends and friendly and neighbors without and still disagree about important things because most of politics really does come down to who's going to shovel the walk.
Right.
Um, I think another question that people have had is the role of the media in all of this. And, I talk to the press a fair amount. I know a lot of other people do, but if we see the media behaving badly or misleading headlines, what do we do? What do people do?
You absolutely have to call the media on it. People need to hear when they are glamorizing the violence, they need to hear about it. They're not perfect in their coverage. To your point, that article, they're really using it for clicks of having that kind of incendiary title. And it's like, is this actually accurate? And if it's not accurate, call the journalist. And when they continue to actually do that kind of coverage, we need to talk to their standards people. They have editors who are supposed to be following ethical standards. So if what they're doing is adding to it, you know, they actually have to be called to task for it because they're not covering the things that are giving a warped worldview. So again, if they're covering it accurately and that's exactly what happened, sure. But most people do not believe in political violence. Like, how are we not seeing so many of those stories? Well, because it's not as interesting as, did Trump not lower the flag for Representative Hortman? Like, that's not the important thing. The important thing is that the president said, right, not okay to kill people. It's not okay to kill people. Everybody needs to say that. So we need to get out of this tit for tat stuff that the media does love to cover because they're actually missing the main story, which is that Americans are horrified by political violence and they want their leaders to work things out without either resorting to or calling for violence.
I, that is such an important point that has to be the story. And I raised this with my graduate students on Monday night. They said, hey, we're going to do this thing. What do you think? And some folks are saying, really, the interesting story is actually most people hate it most of the time because most of the headlines say, hey, support for violence is surging. Somebody did put in the Q&A section asking about institutional trust. And part of the challenge is a lot of people simply don't trust other media, governmental institutions, public institutions. I talked to one of my students who lives here in DC, was talking to some people on vacation in a state in the South, who said, aren't you really glad that the National Guard is on DC? It must be really dangerous. And she said, no, DC is actually pretty safe. Like where I am is pretty safe. The people she was talking to didn't believe her because it contradicted what they saw on television. So how do you manage an environment where the trust, like that level of trust is going on? Like, how do you increase institutional trust and how do you help ensure that people are kind of getting a coherent story?
Well, again, you do need to make news. So, and our leaders would be making news if they were in fact going and meeting with different people and having conversations. Like, where is, the joint congressional call for an investigation into, what are the most successful ways for us to protect our elected officials? What is our way to protect our campaign staff, people that are out there? We should be having a very robust freedom of speech conversation about, who we are as a people. And so, and you don't really see that happening. You see it happening within the sides, but you don't actually see it in a really constructive way where people are modeling for us how you can have these differences of opinion. Again, when some people are really hurting with, things that have happened to people they were personally very close to. And I do think, in an age of lone wolf violence, we're getting this question from John Barth in the chat. How are we getting through? And the truth is, it can seem sort of boring when you're talking about what the normalization of it is. But what's interesting is right now, it's actually the unique part of the stories. The media is so focused, I think, on, chasing down all of these rumors, which is, by the way, not great journalism, to be chasing down rumors versus really looking at what we actually know. And really thinking about this, like we should really be concerned about this lone wolf violence. I'm super interested in that. Like, who's calling for a study of lone wolf violence through the DOJ or whatever? So I would just think about finding these stories of the people who are really trying to engage, and we do know that they're out there, and getting them and feeding those to the media so that the media is at least providing a more balanced view of what's happening out there, as opposed to suddenly everybody's all for political violence, which I don't think is the case.
I think you raise also a really good point that also comes up in the question, and that is when if communications is meaning making, one of the things we've done is we've defined this as political violence because the victim in this case was a spiritual leader and he had a faith side, but he also was a political guy in the political right. Therefore, it must be politically motivated. As you noted earlier, we actually don't really know that much about the person accused of killing Mr. Kirk. It could have been politically motivated, but we've defined it as political violence because the victim was political, right? We don't know the motive of the shooter. We are asserting that. And then we are now asserting that, well, this thing happened, therefore we're going to give it political meaning. This is proof that the left does this or the right does this, or it's the Reichstag fire or the whatever. We are making it political in many ways to serve, to make sense for ourselves. What does this horrific act mean? Well, it means this. And what it means is what I thought all along, which is what most of us do about most things. This isn't an indictment of this one event. But it is really important to note that if somebody is a lone wolf, like that might just be it. It might be like some really angry, upset, or mentally ill or whatever person doing one bad thing that says very little about the other 500,000 elected officials in this country.
Right. But I would say, I mean, we do know, and I think this gets to the heart of what we're talking about here, right? Which is if you are a person and you have values and you want to go into public places like campus and share those values, are you protected to do that in this country? And especially when we're really talking about things that are really important to who we are and what we care about. And at the end of the day, we want people to be able to go and have free speech. And we need to know where the exact line is to when it actually goes over to hate speech. And right now, we've got people really moving this line around a lot, right? And so we as a nation, though, really have to get clear on this. And then we have to be very clear about that it is not okay to act violently to people that you disagree with. So again, violence is just never the answer, and we have to be so strong about that, and we cannot be rationalizing it at all.
So I think that you raise an interesting point I'm going to push on a little bit, and that's I don't know that we need absolute clarity about what is or isn't hate speech or violent speech. Let's just move in that general direction, and if we agree 90%, I'm good with that. And let me give you some examples of also, because I'm afraid that if we say, oh, this isn't, or this isn't, we're going to spend all of our time coming up with a definition and fail to deal with the problem. I think, though, that I want to give an example of how this actually works well. Here at George Washington University, where I spend most of my time, the college Democrats and college Republicans actually share an office, and they have for decades. And in the days after Mr. Kirk's shooting, a number of political leaders on campus from across the political spectrum came together and said, okay, this is wrong. This is not what we got into politics to do. We disagree really seriously about some really important issues, but we're going to debate them out like that's where and the debates are going to be passionate and they're going to be over the top and feelings are going to get hurt. But that's it, because violence is wrong. So I think people are doing, and these are examples of people modeling good behavior, doing the right thing, I think.
And actually, we need to think about the opposite of this. Like we just saw, they turned away the idea that the gunman who took down the CEO of the healthcare company was not a terrorist. And this is interesting because we're starting to see more and more people trying to put things, they're terrorist acts or they're terrorist sympathizers. Those are very strong words. And again, if that's to squelch free speech, we have to be really mindful about that because again, we want to be able to live in a very free country, and that definitely includes our own minds and our own opinions. And I'm seeing like the criminalization, and they quickly try and put it under a criminal category. And we have to be, like you're saying, we have to be very exacting with that. Because when that becomes a slippery slope, then suddenly it's going to be whoever's in charge gets to put labels on people, and that's really going to restrict what you can and cannot do. And I just think as a nation, that is not the direction we want to go.
Absolutely. So we're just about at time. Thank you, Kristen. I think my big headline from this is the ethical response. How to ethically talk about political violence is condemn it, point out that it's really unpopular, it's rare. It's important, it matters, rare, unpopular, unacceptable.
And model doing the hard work, which is actually disagreeing in a way that does not resort to violence. So again, it's the modeling we really need to get leaders to double down on, because right now we got a lot of words out there. We even need more stronger words, but we need more actions, not just words, if we want to get this going in a different direction than we've got it going now.
Perfect message to end on. Thank you, Kristen, as
Thank you,
always.
Peter.
And we hope to see all of you again soon.
See you later.